Does everyone understand English? Okay, great, because I will speak in English. So today we're going to talk about OpenStreetMap, and I just wanted to start with a slide showing everything, in my opinion, that's connected to OpenStreetMap. So in the middle we have the OpenStreetMap logo and the humanitarian mapping logo. This is a movement that started just a few years ago to map the world for humanitarian missions or disaster mapping. Then we have open layers, leaflet, and Mapbox, chronologically stated. Open layer is one of the oldest mapping libraries, leaflet is one of the lightest ones, and Mapbox is also has a standalone leaflet API, but it's also a map production tool. You can make maps, as in style them and produce them. And then we have Postgres and PostGIS. It's just database with a lot of spatial functions that works very well with OSM data. And then we have the open source Geo, and QGIS is the open source GIS software, go-to software for open source mapping. Is anyone familiar with these? Probably are familiar, right? Okay. Introduction. So, anyone familiar with OpenStreetMap? Great. So OpenStreetMap is built by a community. Anyone can view and edit it. It's 100% open and 100% free to use and download. All the raw data can be downloaded. The raw data is in XML, but it can be transformed to any other format. And it works very well with PostGIS. So the idea is, but back in the day, or even now, if you want to make a map, you make pictures on a piece of paper, and that represents your reality, your surroundings. And now we can do all of that with computers, with no knowledge of cartography, in your browser, just by clicking the mouse, and it's very powerful. But OSM is more than just a map, because it's also a source of data. It's used for humanitarian mapping. This started in 2010 after the Haiti earthquake. Search and rescue missions were left with problems because they really had old maps and they didn't even know where they had to go. So they set up a system, not only mapping, but text messages and everything, but there was a mapping component to it. And within 7 hours, they created, with worldwide community mappers, they created the most detailed map yet of Haiti, and that's what it was used for search and rescue missions. 2 current projects going on are the Sri Lanka mapping because of the flood that happened in May, and in Ecuador. And there's also one in Africa where USAID is mapping buildings and such because they want to, I think they want to spray them with something that would keep mosquitoes away, disease-carrying mosquitoes. So the uses are divided in, I guess, online and offline. Online is, again, open layers. GeoServer is a server for spatial data. This is the Mapbox logo, and that's leaflet. Offline use is for spatial analysis, and this, I want to stress this part because in Armenia, where data is scarce, OSM is a gold mine of data. And I teach geospatial or geographic information systems here in Armenia, and I use OSM data in my classes. So this is a very typical problem that I like to do in class, and I ask people to find properties in Yerevan that are located in residential areas that have a rent of between 150,000 and 250,000. Obviously, the rent information is arbitrarily assigned. It's not from OSM. That are within walking distance of bus stops, 400 meters, supermarkets, 800, and schools, 1,500. So here, it's an intermediate step of the solution to the problem. The pink buildings are satisfying some of these criteria. Then we have uses in business cases. Everyone here should be familiar with Mobi and Gigi Taxi. Gigi Taxi started off using OpenStreetMap-based map, but then they switched to Google Maps. I don't know if you want to say a few words on that now.
Yeah, basically now they use visual layer of Google Maps, but they still follow devices and back georeferencing from OpenStreetMap database. So basically when you see address of your house, when you make an order, you see addresses coming from OpenStreetMap. And I'll tell a bit later why they had to change to OpenStreetMap, to Google Maps, and how they could avoid it.
And here are some examples of styling. This is a project that I launched last month. Maybe some of you are familiar with it. So colloquial Armenia. So the idea was to crowdsource the colloquial names of places. And this just uses an OpenStreetMap background. And these are the standard styles that come with it. But you can, it's sort of like OpenStreetMap, but a much lighter version. And the idea was to people to map a neighborhood. So you can look at it later, but there has been 173 edits so far in Yerevan, Vanadzor, and Gyumri. Great. So it's open. I had said that I would make the data available once we hit 200 edits, so we're almost there. And then I want to show an example of using OSM data as a base map style, but then using the actual data within the same framework or website. This is an intermediate project, so I mean, when I say intermediate, I mean incomplete. So the idea was the story behind it, it came from my frustration of traffic jams in Yerevan. So I wanted to, inspired by another project, I forget what university it was from, I apologize. But the idea was to show the urban footprint, the building footprint of cities seen at the same scale. So here I'm showing two different styles. And the idea of this project is that you only want to see the buildings. So I'm only showing water and land. And then if I type in, I don't know, let's say one of the fastest growing cities. So what it's doing now, it's with the API, it's fetching the buildings from the OpenStreetMap database, and it's going to put them on the map as GeoJSON. The problem with this is that it's very heavy. So if I zoom out a bit more, it's going to crash the browser. But just for illustration purposes, so if we compare with Yerevan, mind you, this is 100% dependent on how many buildings have been mapped in OpenStreetMap. But as a source of free data, I think it's good enough to compare cities. For example, we can see that the density in the Philippines is much, much higher than in Yerevan. So for example, if it takes you 20 minutes to travel 2 kilometers in Yerevan, you know that there has been some kind of problem somewhere in the transportation planning. I myself, I'm a civil engineer specialized in transportation. That's why I have a very huge bias towards transportation. So this is an example of how you can use OpenStreetMap data live. And here we have a few other styles. Those familiar with Google Maps will know that you can also style Google Maps, but not as detailed as you can with OSM. For example, an 8-bit styling, etc. 3D buildings. And this one is this graph showing the tags, right? We'll get to that. So here's a quick visualization. I don't know if we'll have a good enough internet connection. Okay, it seems to be working. OpenStreetMap turned 10 years old in 2014, and here's a very quick time lapse of all the edits that have been made in 10 years. If I'm not mistaken, it started in London. The year up here over there. we're not going to have enough time, so that's it. Great. So that was a quick introduction. So now we can go ahead and start exploring the map. Those who have computers with them can go ahead and go to the following URL, openstreetmap.org. I'm going to proceed fairly quickly, okay, because we want to cover as much material as we can. So things you're already familiar with, any online map, you can zoom in, zoom out using the mouse, pan by clicking and dragging. You have your standard zoom buttons here, show my location. Okay, only securely. Then we have base maps, cycle maps. So if we go to Yerevan, you can also search for locations. The cycle map for Yerevan is almost empty because we don't have any cycling routes. But if we go to, before I do that, let's also go look at the transport map. This is also similar to the Google transport layer, transit layer. Again, we only unfortunately see the metro line because the bus lines aren't publicly mapped. So then if we go to somewhere else, here in Amsterdam, you see that the cycle map is very developed. And then there's the humanitarian. These are the base maps. Then we have the legend, in OSM terms, the map key that tells you what each feature is. And at the very bottom, you can also enable map notes. So instead of just showing you the picture of the map, you can look at what notes people have made. Editing and notes are not the same thing. Editing is actually changing the map. Notes is writing things for editors to see. And then if I click on map data, then I can actually see. Why is it not being? Yeah. So now if you click on a feature, you get all the information about that. So this is a building, commercial type theater, etc. And this is a point. It's an entrance. You can even mark entrance to buildings. So let's go back to. So these are the main features that if you want to contribute to the OpenStreetMap, you should be familiar with. Enabling map data, clicking on features to get information about that.
So just basically, if you won't even edit it, you can always just spot a mistake on a map, just create a note, and the editors will see it and will fix it in a days. Just use that note feature on the website.
So those, I know we're actually okay on time. So if people here want to actually do some editing today, you can create an account, and you can create an account by opening the absolutely new account or use a third-party login using one of these 4 logins: OpenID, Google, Facebook, or Windows Live. So are there any people here who are interested in doing this now? Okay. So you just click on sign up and answer the questions. Anyway, it doesn't matter. We can always continue, and we still have a lot of things to show, and part of this workshop is about best practices, if you will, because a lot of, I don't want to say mistakes, but there are a lot of things on OpenStreetMap that could be mapped better than they currently are. So me as a primary user of OpenStreetMap data, meaning that I download, or almost every day I'm always on OSM downloading data, figuring out problems, doing spatial analysis, it's important for me that the data makes sense. So that's why I wanted to do this workshop. So in OpenStreetMap and mapping in general, we represent the world in 3 main fundamental shapes: points, lines, and areas. Points are used for city centers, restaurants, hospitals, churches. Lines are for roads, rivers, railroads, etc. And areas represent buildings, parks, lakes, natural areas, land use. Here I'm showing an example. For example, the points will appear in blue, I'm not showing all the lines, but some of them here in red, and then we have areas. So the darker yellow are buildings, and the lighter yellow is showing residential land use area. What's land use in Armenian? Kadastr?
So we start.
Landschaft or something, I don't know. And are there any GIS professionals in here? Okay. Also, this workshop, I wanted to show a little bit of the back end or the behind the scenes of OSM, because clicking on a map and putting lines and putting attribute information is one thing, and then downloading the data is completely something else. So in OSM, even though we draw points, lines, and areas, things are stored as nodes. I mean, node is common to any language or computer term. So points are stored as nodes. Lines and areas are stored as ways. There is no distinction between them, but the attribute you give the way tells OSM how to encode it. For example, if an area is closed and it should be treated as a polygon, meaning there's a fill in it, then the attribute you give, inherently its area equals yes, will close the shape. Then we have relations and tags. I'm going to start with tags. Tags are your key value pairs. For example, highway equals residential. The key is highway and residential is the value. Or if we're mapping a shop, the key is shop and what type of shop it is. Is it electronics, bakery? Bakery is the value. A relation is just another key value pair, but what it does, it creates relationships between data. For example, if you want to model a turn restriction for a road, it will go as an attribute on the road, but the catch is that it's also a relation, because if you can't turn left, then you're relating the road on the left to the one you're drawing, and that's where the relation comes in.
Relation like a transition?
No, think of it as
any link between objects or any group, any relationship between them.
sort of,
Some sort of from one object to another.
yes. Or think of it as a relationship, sort of in a relational database. That's fine. I've already explained that. So the number one rule when adding features in OpenStreetMap is that whenever you're drawing an unfamiliar feature, you should always check the documentation. There's a very extensive documentation, and it's a free project, so it keeps growing. Some countries have their own standards, which is also in the documentation. So you should get informed before you begin. I just want to focus on a few things that I think are common mistakes. One is the name tag. Whatever you draw, it's a road, it's a company, it's a building, chances are it's going to have a name. So the name tag itself, it's supposed to be the default name. In other words, it should be in the local language and the local alphabet of where you're putting it. So in the Armenian case, whenever you're drawing a new road, you need to put the Armenian name as the value for the name key. Here I have the example of Moscovian Pohots. And then if you want to put other languages, you can add name. For example, for English it's EN, for Russian it's RU. There's even a HY for Armenian, because okay.
Yeah, like you can map any country in Armenian, like let's say kind of Batumi or Tbilisi in Armenian.
Exactly. Another common problem is buildings. For buildings, there are two methods that you can use. One is faster than the other. So method one is whenever you draw a shape, you tag it as a building, and that creates a key value pair called tag building equals yes. And then if your building is a theater, then you can add amenity equals theater. If your building is a, I don't know, hospital, you can add hospital. Method two is the better method, is to actually assign what type of building it is from the get-go. But not every type of building is available in OpenStreetMap. For example, you can model commercial. If a building is commercial function completely, you can tag it as a commercial. And then if within the commercial building you have another more specific use, for example, a mall, you can tag amenity equals mall. So I just want to look at a few examples. Okay, and I'll finish at the 30 mark. So let's look at the Opera building. Back. If I look at this, I see that it's been tagged as building equals yes, amenity equals theater. And this is correct because in the documentation there is no building type theater. So you need you need two pieces of information to show, to tell that it's a theater. Unfortunately, it's loading very slowly. And the types of buildings are here. For example, apartments is a type. And as the case in Yerevan and many other countries, most apartment buildings have a first floor of commercial land use, and you would still tag that as building equals apartments. So these are all things that don't matter to some people, but for people like me who primarily download the OSM data for spatial analysis, I need to, whether it's going straight into Postgres or something else, I need to write my select statements to account for errors. So the more errors I spot, it's better for me. But the more correct the mappers map things, then the less errors you have. The next example I want to show is Russia Mall. In this case, we have again building yes, and then where is it? We have a shop tag for mall. This is not incorrect, but another option would have been to tag the building as commercial or retail, and then shop equals mall. And the last example I want to show is the Blue Mosque.
Isn't it possible to add multiple tags for one building?
Yes. Where is it? I'm lost. No. Okay. For the Blue Mosque, we have again building yes, denomination. Oh wait, let's go. Where is it? Place of worship. I don't see it. Okay. So we have building yes, amenity is place of worship. The religion is Muslim, and denomination is the specific type of. So great. And this is where the community part comes in. Well, rule of thumb is you should only map what you know, but the community aspect of OpenStreetMap is that anyone can go and correct it. So we have one mistake spotted, its denomination is wrong. Another one here, in my opinion, is that this shouldn't have been tagged as building equals yes, because in the documentation for buildings, where is it? We have a building type equals mosque. Okay? So the result is the same, but as far as the data and how accurate it is, it makes a difference. So it all depends on the final use of the data, because OpenStreetMap is a base map in the sense that a base map is supposed to show the most fundamental information. For example, a forest, a cemetery, a park where kids play will all show up in shades of green. Okay? So that's much better than having nothing. But as far as someone who's working with data is concerned, I would like to tell if it's a cemetery or a park. Right. So for the same reason, if you think I'm being, I don't want to say a bad word, going into too much detail about these buildings, is because it makes someone else's life easier at some point. I think I'm doing okay. And the last one I want to focus on is water. Unfortunately, OSM is not all, it's still evolving, And so it's very tricky to tag water. All bodies of water except for swimming pools have to be tagged with natural equals water to begin with. Okay? The swimming pool is tagged by leisure. Leisure equals swimming pool. So if you have artificial lakes, they should be tagged as natural equals water, water equals pond or reservoir. But then, again, in Armenia, we have so many bodies of water within the city, artificial bodies of water, that are not artificial lakes. Karabilich is not an artificial lake because, by definition, an artificial lake, to the naked eye, would appear as a natural lake, even though it was man-made at some point. So, bodies of water in the city should be tagged as a fountain. For example, the Republic Square, that's definitely a fountain. But Karabilich, I think, should be tagged as a reflecting pool. A reflecting pool is a shallow body of water that, in nighttime, when the light falls into it, it creates a nice landscape. And so I just want to look at that example quickly. So let's start with this one. So if I click on this, I should be correcting these mistakes, but I don't because they make for good examples. So here we have tagged as land use equals basin. Now I don't know much, but I think the swimming pool in Russian is basen, but basin in English is detention basin, and retention basin is a depression in land where water is allowed to go to then later seep into the ground safely to avoid floods. That's what a basin is. So it shouldn't be tagged as a basin. But here's the catch. It was tagged as natural water first. So, and I don't know how the layering of the styling works, but we can assume that OSM takes the natural equals water tag and automatically assigns the color blue to it. So here the mistake is completely hidden. So just little things like this. Same thing with Pavlovok, and this is an example of a swimming pool. I'll show you. See, this one is a swimming pool, and it's tagged correctly because leisure equals swimming. You can also collect data in the field. There's this website that creates atlases for people who don't have access to any geographic software. You can just make one, print it out, and go make the edits, come back at home and start editing. Okay, you can take over.
Do you want to show a little?
Yes. Okay. Okay, I can show it. So in OSM, actually, no, let's just cover this slide. In OpenStreetMap, you have the options to do editing. There's offline editing and there's online editing. Offline editing is a Java program called JOSM. I forget what it stands for. Java OpenStreetMap. Okay. So it's Java software. It can be as advanced as you want it to be. It's a good tool to learn because you can make many edits, make mistakes, and you can only save once you're sure. But that's not very convenient for most people. And then because of that, we have online editing tools. And in the history of OpenStreetMap, there have been a few. But the latest one is called the ID editor. And it's very easy to use. It's good for adding quick points or for fixing errors. For example, the blue mosque error, we can actually go ahead and fix it right now. So once you have an account, you can hit the edit button, sign in. There's a walkthrough you can do, but we're not going to do it now. This is what the ID editor looks like. What was it? What was it supposed to be? That's what it says. Did someone already change it? Because I'm like, that's not what we saw earlier. Good job, good job. Okay. Okay, let's use someone's neighborhood. Somewhere that's not mapped already.
Like, it's not mapped, like we can go like down the street, down the street.
You can go Russian gone.
Really?
This one.
But like the web Russian here.
Yeah, its multilingual name is already correct.
No, like the
not?
Russian we need to fix. I'm just not sure if I have web Russian here.
But isn't it?
It should be with cat. The one which looks like.
Yeah, that's beyond my. KB win. Oh, it was a G. I get it. Am I supposed to close this?
No, it does.
Okay. Okay. Let's do building. Somewhere where building is not mapped.
Like on the Rhine Street.
What street?
On the Rhine Street, just close to the between
Mm-hmm.
where we
Okay.
are now. Actually, I think in ID editor also programs kind of soft, sometimes much better than just.
It seems okay. So just as an example, wait, what are these buildings? Are they houses?
Yeah, right.
Okay. So I will click on the area tool, and I want to roughly draw this building like this, and you double click the last point to finish it. Then this is how the ID editor works. It makes your life easier. Because you just put an area, it will start by giving you area features, then others. It will assign the tag building equals yes. Okay? But from what I understand, these are houses. So I can just click on house, and it will assign the house attribute. Address, name, obviously doesn't have a name.
If you click on street, it will suggest on that line by default. Oh, no.
Is it on the line or is it this
Second.
one?
Good question. I think Starman looks from here, but we can leave it empty, just not try to find information.
So let's leave it empty. Okay, that's good enough. Now if you click on the feature, you get a series of options in a circular menu. This one is to rotate the object. This is to square the corners, which I will do. This is to move to another location. We'll leave it there. And this is to make the area circular. If you have circular buildings, or if you're drawing a roundabout, then you would want your area circular. So this is a useful tool for buildings, because what it does is no one can draw a perfect square using the mouse. So if I click on this, it's going to make the corners more 90 degrees. Then I can click save, and it will ask you to put some comments. What should we put? Bar camp.
Edit new building or something. It's just a string which other editors will see, and it will help them understand what you are doing and why you are doing. Especially if you change something which is not very obvious, try to describe like.
Okay. Do you want to talk about the points now?
Yeah. I think we can initiate.
You want the microphone?
I'll just stand close to it. Waste time. So basically, as you've seen, what we used now to draw the building, it was satellite imagery, IRL imagery. But a lot of things on OpenStreetMap, especially in Yerevan, were drawn using GPS only. Because basically, when I started editing OpenStreetMap, it was 2008, I believe, where the Yahoo layer, like satellite imagery from Yahoo, and it was 10 years old. So even the Habitation Bridge wasn't there yet, like Northern Avenue was low resolution, etc. So when new roads appear, the only way to draw them was just to put a GPS tracker, a device which basically tracks your location and writes it down every second, go with the car a few times over the street, and then what you see here is actually all the GPS points. You can probably understand it's like Yerevan, this is like small, like downtown, this is like Aleksey and Komitas. For example, this is Montana Elkonian, the new road which leads to airport. And you can see it on satellite imagery. If you go now with your ID editor, it's just a field because like images, photos are old. So how we draw it, it's with GPS. And site, helping in cases when there is no imagery available, it also makes things much more accurate. Because sometimes on some maps, what you see on GPS and what you see on map may be like meters apart, 10 meters apart, etc. With enough of tracks, enough of good GPS data on OpenStreetMap, we're able to make things very accurate.
And according to the regulations, you can't use proprietary sources to input information in, but there's the Bing imagery, there's the Mapbox imagery. Also, when the imagery doesn't line up, the GPS data that you have collected can be, where is it? Data layers, not local, photo overlay. How do we enable the... Yeah, but we won't enable the GPX layers. Easier in JOSM.
Yeah, it's JOSM that does it that much.
Anyway, I can't remember what it was, but you can enable the GPX, public GPX tracks that people have uploaded, so you can see them on the map. If I put local, it's going to ask me to browse the file. Do you know where it is? Oh, yeah, there you go. Didn't see it, sorry. So that will enable all the GPS traces that people have made public. And once you have that, you can adjust the offset. I'm just going to do it as an example here. Here we see that it's okay, but just to show, let's go somewhere where there's an offset. Okay, it's okay. We don't really. Here, okay. Let's say there's a small offset with the buildings here. So before you continue your editing, you might want to adjust the offset, and you can do it by dragging this gray box. So if you pay attention, I'm trying to align the buildings with the background image, which was not correct. I should be aligning it with the GPS traces. So the GPS traces seem to be going pretty much center of the image, so it's fine. So the offset was correct already. But there are in cases where there's a huge offset, and that's how you would correct it. Okay. Let's leave 10 minutes for questions. You want to talk about these mobile apps?
Yeah, basically just two words. Like a lot of people have Google Maps in their phones by default out of the box, and when they want to use OpenStreetMap data, they don't know what to use. The most popular and future-reach applications are Osman and Maps.me. Maps.me is by Mail.ru. It's fast, cute, and free, It doesn't have like a lot of features. For example, Osmand allows you to use all the possible data at Wikipedia layer, use whatever language you want. For example, you can probably go to Georgia with Maps.me if you don't know the Georgian alphabet, because it will show you map in Georgia.
I've done
With
that before.
Osmand, it's not a problem. You just select the language you want. Like you want English, you want Romanian, or Russian, whatever language is available, you can use it. Plus the routings, but again, Osmand is very feature-rich. There is a paid version. It allows you to get daily updates of maps, which is currently yet in beta state. But still, and Maps.me is being updated like once in 1 or 2 months. But both are quite useful. And I think both are available under Android and iOS.
Here's a screenshot of the offline editing program, the Java software. You can see it's much more detailed.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things which I want to mention. So OpenStreetMap is often called Wikipedia of maps. And you probably know that any edit on Wikipedia is stored, and you can always compare and see who did what, when, why, etc. So same is true for OpenStreetMap. You can always see all the revision history. And what it also means that if someone did something wrong or deleted it, it's very easy to fix it back. And in the beginning we mentioned that Digitaxi was using OpenStreetMap in the beginning, and then they switched to Google Maps. So yesterday I talked to them, and the reason was that in February someone deleted a couple of huge areas in North, like 7, 8, 9 North were just deleted. So what Digitaxi did, they just panicked. They didn't realize it can be undeleted in just like a few seconds. So they spent a night drawing it again from scratch in just one night. But you can just easily recover it in a few seconds. And that's what I did actually, but I learned about it just about like months later. So what I also had to do, besides undeleting the layer, was to delete the duplicate layer I got. Because there was an old layer and the new layer we did draw in one night. So I had to delete the new layer and undelete the one. So it's one of those things, like if you see something is like really messed up or some areas disappeared, like there are my contact details in the end of the slide. Or you can just go to Wiki, OpenStreetMap and learn it, but like you can just contact me and I will undelete it and bring it back in just 1 minute. Just one request, try to let me know as soon as you can, because if we leave it for days or weeks, then other editors will come and make some edits, and I will have to ruin their work, which isn't really appreciated in open source community. So just let me know about progress.
I think we mentioned all of these.
Just this one isn't like nested thing, so I'll mention it. In JSON, when you pan, you use like one button, and when you move objects, you use another button, so this never happens. But what happens in Ideator, when you try to move a map, sometimes some point is selected. So what can happen is that you think that you are scrolling map, but what happened here was that you see roads, like 3 roads are going to one point. So what happened, like there was a one point here, which connected this street and this street. But when someone was moving it, it went all there and messed things up. Again, it's easy to fix, but currently we don't have enough patrolling users to fix these mistakes like fast enough. So it stayed online for 2 to 3 days, I think, before we fixed it. So just when you use Ideator and move, just make sure that you don't have anything selected and you move map and not any point, not any object.
Okay, and the humanitarian mapping tool. This is the official humanitarian mapping website with the tasking manager, as it's called. And here you have ongoing tasks. If you're interested, you can click on one. It describes you where it is. This is the malaria prevention in Mozambique tracing guide. So this is for malaria prevention. I think it's the one I mentioned earlier. And the instructions are given. It says, for this task, you should focus on drawing buildings and roads. That's because they're going to spray the buildings with something. And if you want to contribute, you can click on a square and start mapping that square. Or you can take a task at random. If a square is too big, you can split it up into smaller ones, as you see here. And you get an overview of the activity. And here there's at the bottom there's a legend. Yellow outline is when it's currently being worked on. Yellow is when the square is done, and green is when it's validated. So again, the community aspect is always present. You can map whatever you want, and then someone else will review your work and validate it. Or invalidate it. IT? Oh, right. So, as it turns out, this tool is also open source and available on GitHub. And there are a few available in the world now. And we are trying to get one started for Armenia through a few sources. But I think we're going to combine and have just one for Armenia. Anyone heard of the Trans-Caucasian Trail? Trans-Armenian Trail? So in that group there's a person who has worked with OpenStreetMap a lot, and he set one up. I don't know if it's online. Let's see. I can't remember the URL. So this is just a temporary one. There are some mapping projects going on in Georgia now. I'm going to add one for Armenia. I think we're going to start with southern Armenia, Kapan area, to map it because that's where they're going to start. So this can be used for anything. In this case, it's for hikers who are trail building. I'm going to start a project relating to smoking soon. I'm going to try to use OpenStreetMap data to create some kind of smoking index similar to walking indexes. For example, when you go to a city, you can get a walking score by clicking on a point. It tells you how walkable the area is. So I'm thinking with the power of open data, because in OSM you can assign smoking, non-smoking, separated smoking, dedicated smoking, all kinds of smoking information to restaurants and everything. So using that and the spatial relationship between restaurants or buildings, I think it's possible to create some kind of indicator for a location or for cities. So I'm probably going to set up a tasking manager for that as well, so that volunteers or people who would like to join the project, once I get some kind of funding from someone, can join and add these smoking attributes. And this can be something very big, or it can just be something just very small. That's it. Okay, we can show. Where was it? MP4. And here's just a video of the evolution in Haiti after the earthquake. Again, it's the same concept. The date appears at the bottom.
Well, it's basically some background. When Haiti was striking with earthquake, there wasn't any map available of Haiti. So when rescuers came, they couldn't really coordinate their movement, analyze what, etc. There was nothing. And there was a call to OpenStreetMap that hey, people are provided with a fresh satellite imagery. Can you please let's go and draw the map. And basically just in a few days, in just over a week, a full map of Haiti was drawn, and it was used by emergency setters, rescuers, etc., United Nations, whatever. And that's basically how humanitarian also kicked.
So to wrap up, always read the documentation before you start. Make sure you look at the local documentation as well. If you're working with something like the tasking manager, the information should be given to you already in the instructions and the description. And then the community aspect is there, so just map only things that you're sure of. If you have friends in the community, ask them to contribute as well for the parts that you're not sure of. Are there any questions? That's it. Yes?
How Mascot can actually get funded because it's open source?
Sorry, can you speak up?
Yeah, because it's open source, how really Mascot can fund it if compared to Google Maps, for instance? because there's anyone can come in and can delete things. Of course, you can undo it, but I see it as a big disadvantage compared to Google Maps.
Well, actually, like we wanted to avoid comparing directly Google Maps and OpenStreetMap, but Google Map in Armenia, for example, is also like crowdsourced, and we have editors of Google Maps here as well. And unfortunately, what Google Maps had to do was just to close down the editor a year ago. So now you basically, like, for over a year, Armenia cannot be edited. Things change, buildings add, new roads appear, and people cannot edit Google Maps, unfortunately. We are still waiting for it to be over. So both systems have this disadvantage. Any crowdsourced, any open platform has such risk, but like there are also advantages. So like, you have to pay for it. Like, you have to pay for it being free, very dynamic. You are having an army of supporters, editors, etc., etc. So yes, it is. Like I think it's one of the challenges for Armenian mapping community to set up some controlling system, because a lot of people come and make edits, but I don't think enough people review. So sometimes something wrong may stay for weeks or even months. That's why one of the reasons why I say just let me know, like, can you throw in the context? I understand that it may be complicated, but just see some on Facebook or whatever.
Also, just want to answer the question. In my experience, the open source world, they're not that evil. When I first started the Colloquial Armenia project, I wrote a line of code, the base map came, and it said some like F Armenia, whatever. The names of the streets had changed to Screw Armenia or worse things, probably done by our neighbors. But again, I guess the community aspect comes in, and maybe it's not big here, but it was big enough to solve that problem. And also, this system is also completely open. And people told me, oh, what if someone goes and deletes everything? So when I wrote this, I had a script backing up the database every 15 minutes, because about dragons live here. They had marked something like that, but that was the only stupid thing that was. Yeah, obviously this website didn't reach the whole world, so the chances of bad things happening is very slim. But generally, people aren't that evil in the open source.
Yeah, actually, I don't remember like many cases of like data being screwed up like this. Nord case, which affected Digitaxi, I think was the biggest one. And there was some conflicts about Nagorno-Karabakh border, but like there is a status quo which we try not to touch for the last few years.
We have two more questions. Yes.
I want to know if there are any features for users to add some notes, reports of like real-time traffic jams or roads under construction.
Like Waze.
Sorry?
Are you familiar with Waze?
Yeah, but like roads under construction.
I mean like traffic jams, like traffic issues, etc. Well, actually, I think one of the things we didn't mention is that there is like different philosophy between like Google Maps, Yandex Maps, and OpenStreetMap. So Google Maps or Yandex Maps are like all-in-one service. They provide you with each one of services. OpenStreetMap is more of like a Unix way, if you know what it means. It means like you should use like one small tool which does one thing, but it does it well, and then tools should be connectable. So OpenStreetMap is like that. For example, even when you search on OpenStreetMap website, the search doesn't happen on OpenStreetMap. It uses another servers and other utilities, etc. So it's a bunch of different tools. So I believe yes, there are some tools for reporting it. Like it's a separate tool. It connects to OpenStreetMap. Maybe it's again open source and free, but I just don't know it because I don't drive. But I believe there are something like that.
You can add a note like this.
Well, I think you want something more dynamic than not will stay there for days.
It's not like other applications like this. Yeah, but Waze has a completely other mission as well. To become a Waze user, you need to drive a car. If you haven't driven a certain number of kilometers, you can't use the.
I use it.
Yeah.
question.
Yes.
Is it possible to extract from other programs like I'm using Ranger for tracking and want to do it and export to
You can import GPX directly. Other formats, there are scripts that have been written, but they don't work very well.
Yeah, but like usually exor converters, Garmin for CSV, like GPX is kind of popular format for storing GPS tracks. And yes, you can upload it, it will be useful. The only request, avoid uploading tracks which were recorded with phone. Because usually phone, especially if it's not like up in the sky with nothing, it provides very clumsy GPS tracks. So sometimes there is a road and then there is a phone track which is going zigzag around the road. So it's more harm than good. But like if you have something like tracker, or you can put phone under your windshield, it's car, so it has a good sky coverage, then it will have a good GPS resolution. And yes, you can upload data, you can write a track. And another important thing is that like not all the data is open source and free, but if there is a feature you are missing, let's say we want to map all the Qashqai, you can always go to Wiki and say, hey, I have a proposal for a new tag for this feature, it's really useful, etc. And it will probably be implemented in a sensible time. And it goes for any like data which makes sense. For example, you can, for any building, you can specify which condominium is working on it, let's say, or something. And you can also create separate layer of data. For example, like your power network or gas network, you can have a separate layer with all your infrastructure mapped on it. And you can use all the power open source, but be safe that no one will vandalize your data and no one will change it for you. So it's a lot, something which a lot of companies in Europe or Russia do if they can't afford professional GIS maps.
Okay, our time is up, so if you have any more questions, be outside.